In December of 2017, the New York Times was responsible for bringing news about the secret Pentagon UFO study known as AATIP to the world.
Oh my gosh. We're going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots to the west. Oh, dude.
And since then, they've oddly chosen to rarely tackle the issue. But recently, they published a new article that offered bombshell revelations about off-world vehicles being recovered by our very own U.S. government. Yet, is it all accurate? With multiple corrections by the New York Times already being posted, and with other changes to their original article without any acknowledgement at all, who knows what to believe anymore? Join me as I dissect the claims put forward by the New York Times, and you can decide for yourself what it all may mean. Stay tuned. You're about to journey inside the Black Vault. That's right, everybody. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and making this your podcast or your live stream of choice. If you're joining me on YouTube and watching the video, as you watch, it's a huge help if you will consider punching that thumbs up button that you see below. Make sure you also subscribe to the channel and turn the notifications on so you know when the videos drop. If you're listening to a podcast version, whether it be on iTunes or Google Play or on a Droid or Stitcher or however you are listening to me right now, I would really appreciate any review that you could put on. I aim for 5 stars. I won't tell you what to do, but I do aim for the 5-star level, and it is a huge help for me, and it doesn't cost you a thing. So I would appreciate you considering doing that. If you do want to join the visual versions in the future, go to www.theblackvault.com/live. That will bounce you to the YouTube channel that you can subscribe to. Again, everything's free. Nothing is behind a paywall. But if you do find that you want to support this channel, I do have a Patreon linked below or in the show notes page at theblackvault.com/show notes, and that will break down every way you can support the site, but more so watch and listen to every episode that I have blasted out there. Now, in this particular episode, there's a lot to deal with. I'm going to be talking about the New York Times and their recent UFO article that literally has gotten the world abuzz again. Now, the New York Times deserves a lot of credit, specifically Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, and Leslie Kean, for writing the article that they did back in December of 2017, which started it all. Now, you may not have seen the printed version because, well, let's face it, print isn't as popular as online anymore. But this is the printed version of that original article. You don't see this as much as you do the online version. So I thought it would be fun to show this for those watching on the video. You'll see the article was on the front page, Real UFOs, Pentagon Unit Tried to Know. And then they continued it later in the paper, Are UFOs Real? Secret Pentagon Unit Tried to Find Out. What you're probably more used to is this right here, Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's mysterious UFO program. Now, this was obviously what really started this entire firestorm of UFO coverage. And I will not take away from the impact of this article because I will become a little bit critical here on their most recent. But I do want to start off by saying this was a critical article in how you have seen the UFO topic evolve here in the last 2.5 years or so since December of 2017. Now, they haven't, as I said in the introduction, they haven't covered UFOs a whole lot since then. I'm not really sure why, to be blatantly honest with you. Maybe they don't have a lot to cover. The New York Times is very serious, obviously. Whether you love them or hate them, they obviously have a very high reputation in the sense that they've been around for a long time. again, you can argue whichever political way you want to on whether or not that reputation is deserved or not. But regardless, they have a pretty high standard of the information that they put out there, or at least they should have that high standard. So maybe UFOs just, very rarely hits that bar. So they did do a couple others. They did one where they interviewed military pilots about UFOs. That was another good one where they broke down some stuff, obviously tying in a little bit to the Unidentified series. But that's okay. Those are important stories to hear about and to see highlighted. Now, in the last couple of weeks, maybe a month or more, social media has been abuzz with the New York Times was doing another UFO article. And unfair to the journalists, and I will stress this, unfair to the journalists, there were some that were getting a lot of attention for the claims they were making. They were not journalists, nor were they contributing to the article, nor were they writing it, nor really did they have a clue of what was going on. But that didn't stop them from using their social media reach, but also even going on some podcasts and even a national radio show, touting that the New York Times was going to be doing this article and pushing and pushing and pushing. Now, the meme that you're showing, that I'm showing on the video, thanks to Twitter account Hoffmania #1 on there, quick shout out to them, who made this meme where this literally is what it became. It was this poking of the New York Times, specifically those journalists, Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, to drop a UFO article, and they kept pushing. And they kept speculating. And to a journalist, that's just not professional, and it's not right. It's one thing to hype something up and be excited. It's another thing to start poking and prodding and creating an aura around what was coming that was completely going to set the public up for a letdown. And essentially, that's what it did. Now, partially, that letdown is deserved. We'll get into that. But I wanted to note that this New York Times article that was so hyped, it was rumored that it was going to deal with the Wilson documents. I've done a video on this very channel. If you don't know what those are, there's really not a whole lot of evidence. Actually, any evidence at all, to be honest with you. Nothing substantial anyway that supports these notes and this document that's now been around for more than a year. That didn't stop the speculation that the New York Times was going to break open this story, even though Admiral Thomas Wilson, former Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was listed on the documents, said the entire thing was a work of fiction. How the New York Times was going to get around that, no one knew, but that didn't stop them from speculating. They also said it was going to deal with a crash retrieval document from the MJ-12 stack of records that have circulated literally for decades. I did a video on this as well, a separate video, breaking down the fact that there was irrefutable proof that this was also a hoax. More so of a hoax than the Wilson documents, meaning it's pretty likely those are hoaxed. We don't have the definitive proof. When it comes to this document, the source, the guy who originally was forwarding it around, Timothy Cooper, I proved beyond a doubt using the rubber stamp at the top, the handwriting that was on multiple pages, that it came from his collection. And he said later, after years of touting it, it was all a hoax. Wouldn't stop the New York Times, apparently, because the speculation kept flying. I want to support and defend the fact that that was not fair to these two journalists, Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean. Again, although some criticism is going to be warranted, which you'll see, I just wanted to lay the groundwork that this New York Times article was a letdown because primarily of the hype surrounding it, that it was not warranted at all. And so I hope that that doesn't dismay these journalists from at least pushing forward, but hopefully they will be a little bit more careful. Because even though that hype that wasn't deserved and played a role in the letdown, so did the information when this article dropped with the headline, "No longer in shadows, Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public." The journalists, like I referenced, Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, here was the article, and it was mostly about the Senate Special Select Committee on Intelligence, chaired by Marco Rubio, who also on this channel, just plugging some videos so you guys have some extra material to see, has recently talked about unidentified aerial phenomena and the importance of getting the information from the intelligence community and the importance about getting a report. So we are seeing that kind of go through the process here of potentially becoming a mandated requirement that the intelligence community create a unclassified report. Huge news. This is a big deal and something that deserves attention. That's what primarily this document was about. But then it started spiraling, kind of out of control a little bit. Because in the New York Times article, it made a bombshell claim 15 paragraphs down. Sorry, I cut my little paragraph marking here, but it's 15 paragraphs down from the original publication. And they stated in this New York Times article that Senator Harry Reid, that we know spearheaded getting the funding for what was, again, this what is touted as a Pentagon UFO study. The article said he believed, meaning Senator Reid believed, that crashes of vehicles from other worlds had occurred and that retrieved materials had been studied secretly for decades, often by aerospace companies under government contracts. I'm sorry, what? That is your headline. Why is that in paragraph number 15? But if you look at the next paragraph, the quote that allegedly supported saying that Reid believed that crashes of vehicles from other worlds occurred, here was his quote. After looking into this, I came to the conclusion that there were reports. Some were substantive, some not so substantive, that there were actual materials that the government and the private sector had in their possession. That has nothing to do with off-world vehicles or vehicles from other worlds. And yet they made that claim. So immediately I called it out. And the reason is because I have followed what Senator Harry Reid has said. And I'll get into his lack of progression, meaning he's stayed consistent. He hasn't progressed with his beliefs at all. He has stayed consistent. So I posted it on Twitter that very day in a thread. And I highlighted that paragraph that I just read to you and said, that there was no supporting quote. Now, I don't consider myself a journalist, nor do I advertise myself as one. I write articles, I have a lot of fun with it, and I try to follow journalistic standards, but there's people out there that are a lot better at that than I am, and I don't take away from their talent and expertise by saying, I'm a journalist. I'm not, but I enjoy following the standards and bringing information to you in both written form and also videos. But even I know that you should have a supporting quote for laying a bombshell such as that. So I called it out. What happened within 24 hours? No, I don't believe that there's a connection by me calling it out, by the way. But what happened within 24 hours of that article? The New York Times took it all back. They issued a correction the day after that article was published, the day after my Twitter post was published, and it said an earlier version of this article inaccurately rendered remarks attributed to Harry Reid, the retired Senate Majority Leader from Nevada. Mr. Reid said he believed that crashes of objects of unknown origin may have occurred and that retrieved materials should be studied. He did not say that crashes had occurred and that retrieved materials had been studied secretly for decades. This is a screenshot from the article. This is a huge difference from what was originally published. And that's bad. Because that type of a bombshell should never have been printed. And yet it started getting reprinted by Popular Mechanics and a couple other major organizations, citing that Harry Reid, too, believed this. So I reached out to Ralph and Leslie, and they issued me joint statements, and I'm really sorry. Let me see if I could take myself out of here. I'm sorry that I am cutting off my slide here. Let me make a quick adjustment on this video. Apologies. There we go. Sorry about that. So now it's not cut off. So the question that I posed to Ralph and Leslie was the following, and I'm going to read it so my audio version listeners understand exactly what I asked. The New York Times was forced to issue a correction about Harry Reid stating his beliefs that crashes of, quote, off-world vehicles had occurred. This is a major bombshell claim to make, but was not backed up by any quote as originally printed. I understand mistakes happen, but can there be any citable reason this did happen? Meaning, was this just an oversight or accident? Do you feel Senator Reid is backtracking or regretting giving you that statement? And if the latter, did you have a quote from him that supported your article as originally written? This is a attributable quote from them both. In response to me, they are okay with me sharing it. They stated, quote, as noted in the Times, we corrected a characterization of Senator Reid's views. He was not misquoted. Our story includes direct quotes from him, and neither have been challenged. We have more material from our interview with him than we were able to include in the story. Now, I didn't talk about the quotes, but I feel, and this is why I highlighted it on your screen here, that the word statement here, that was my mistake. I didn't really mean it that way. I meant regretted giving you the, I guess, implication that he felt that way, the idea he felt that way. I misworded it by saying statement, so I think that that's why she responded to that part, or that they responded to that part. But regardless, they note that he was mischaracterized. I'm not going to put them under a spotlight and keep grilling him. Why did you do it? This, that, and the other thing. Other people are doing that on social media. I don't care to do that. Mistakes are mistakes. They're going to happen. But this was something that was huge and needs to be called out. And in fact, don't take my word for it about being called out. Senator Harry Reid also responded that day on the 24th, the day after he was mischaracterized in that article. He tweeted out, I have no knowledge, and I have never suggested the federal government or any entity has unidentified flying objects or debris from other worlds. I have consistently said we must stick to science, not fairy tales about little green men. Here's me defending him. He is absolutely right here. Not only because I agree with him and his wording and his viewpoint, and I have been very critical of Senator Harry Reid and his connection to this, that I'll fully admit, and I believe that I have good reason why. But on this, I'll defend his stance, but sadly, the UFO community is not. What do? They turn it into a conspiracy. They start firing shots at him on Twitter and various social media platforms saying that pretty much he's compromised, that somebody got to him, that he's essentially lying, that this, that, and the other thing. This is not what the field needs. The New York Times messed up. Let's leave it alone. If they want to come out and say, you know what, we had a quote from Harry Reid, he's backtracking, that's not our fault, great. Let's put it all out there on the table. But according to those who were speaking on behalf of, I guess on behalf of the New York Times, but the journalists themselves stated they fixed the mischaracterization. So why attack Harry Reid? I'll give you the proof that he's stayed consistent. Back in March of 2018, just a couple months after the story broke, a few months after the story broke originally, Harry Reid in New York Magazine, when he was approached by the journalist Eric Benson about talking about UFOs, this was a quote from Harry Reid. Well, I'm happy to talk to you. Just let me preface this by saying this. If we're here to talk about little green men or stuff that you want to look at that was found in New Mexico or something, I'm not interested. If you are here to talk about science, I'm happy to do that. I'm really glad to do that. I'm glad somebody is interested because it's a subject that's being terribly neglected, so I'm happy to talk to you. This was a couple years ago, and he's pretty much spot on consistent. Here's another one in January of 2019. Senator Harry Reid in an interview states, I think it is something we can't ignore. I personally don't know if there exist little green men places. I kind of doubt that. But I do believe the information we have indicates we should do a lot more study. He said there are eyewitness accounts from hundreds of people, including military pilots, of unexplained objects moving through the air, all in the same way. Reid said he is working with a member of Congress to create a place for military pilots to report what they see without fear or reprisals. So I combined a little bit of Harry Reid's actual quote with a quote from this article. But again, that was January of 2019. Consistent. He has not wavered from that. Doesn't want to talk about little green men. He even said it in George Knapp interviews and sit-downs. I always found that interesting because I have often wondered, is he being mischaracterized? Is he talking about things and we're kind of alluding to more of the UFO/alien thing versus what he is saying, hey, this could be a threat. There's some nuts and bolts stuff flying above us. We need to figure it out. And I think it's the latter, and I support that. So kudos to him for remaining consistent, because in this field and in this topic, that doesn't happen a lot. So over the last couple of years, he absolutely has. Now, at this time, I also want to point out in that New York Magazine interview, this is a little bit of a left turn, but I think it's very important because Harry Reid is often cited for being an expert and staying in tune with what AATIP was doing, who was involved, and so on. Now, these aren't my words, nor is it speculation. New York Magazine asked him about being briefed by that programmer, those involved within. And he said no. Harry Reid said, quote, "No, I left everybody alone." Nope. In regards to being asked if he was ever briefed. The journalist pushed again because I would have. Really? If you have this interest, why wouldn't you stay in touch with it? And so the journalist said, "You were never briefed?" Harry Reid solidified it and said, "That's not my style." Nope. So citing him as an expert on what was happening and so on, how much did he know? Did he go after the fact? Was he getting secret briefings? Like, what was going on here? So where I'm skeptical then of Reid, again, vouching for what this was all about and so on, how would he know? Was he getting this fed onto the side, served up on a silver platter to him in a House chamber or Senate chamber or what? We don't know. But stuff like this needs a little bit of clarification. So that said, he's remained consistent and stated that he largely stayed out of everything. That correction, though, with Harry Reid was not the only one. Now, I don't fault the New York Times as much for this one. This is more of a, this does happen. But later in the day of July 24th, after the Harry Reid tweet, I believe it was after the Harry Reid tweet, but also after their first correction, they issued another correction. They stated an earlier version also misstated the frequency with which the Director of National Intelligence is supposed to report on unidentified aerial phenomena. It is 180 days after enactment of the Intelligence Authorization Act, not every 6 months. So that's not as big of a blunder, and I really don't fault them for that because this stuff is confusing as heck. I'm surprised none of their fact checkers at the New York Times actually got that, or caught that, or fact checked it. But I'll let the New York Times figure out what went wrong there. Regardless, though, it should be noted that these mistakes are happening too often in this article. So what are we left with at this point since, the bombshell was taken out? Well, we have this. Dug even deeper into the article in paragraph number 18. This was by Eric Davis. Now, if that name sounds familiar to you, if you're not fully aware, he was connected through the AATIP program, the offshoot. This is a confusing point. There are 3 versions of what the relationship between AATIP and AATIP really is. But if you believe the Pentagon, AATIP was the part of AATIP that was contracted out to the private sector. The private sector then brought in different scientists, headed by Hal Puthoff, through Bigelow Aerospace's subsidiary known as BASS. Hal Puthoff was the top. As we are told, he was the one that kind of made the decisions of what papers would be written. There were 38 of them. And one of the scientists that was brought in was Dr. Eric Davis, who happened to have worked with Dr. Hal Puthoff for many, many years through his own private corporation. So it was a very tight-niched group that was being enlisted to write these papers. So Eric Davis was one of those scientists. So that's his kind of connection to all this. Well, back to the New York Times article and their reference to Eric Davis. He talks about how he examined materials, that he was able to not determine their source, and he concluded we couldn't make it ourselves. That was a quote. We couldn't make it ourselves. That's what he told the New York Times. So humans couldn't make it. It's by aliens. Well, it's solidified later in the article with Mr. Davis. I'm going to read this to you. Mr. Davis, who now works for Aerospace Corporation, a defense contractor, said he gave a classified briefing to a Defense Department agency as recently as March about retrievals from off-world vehicles not made on this Earth. There's your bombshell. There's solidifying that we couldn't make it ourselves. That means humans, and we're dealing with aliens. Back to the quote. Mr. Davis said he also gave classified briefings on retrievals of unexplained objects to staff members of the Senate Armed Services Committee on October 21st, 2019, and to staff members of the Senate Intelligence Committee 2 days later. Also, very bold claims to make. Also, not how it was originally published, but you don't see that in the correction. So let me prove it to you. Here is a screenshot, if you're watching on the video, of that same paragraph that I read to you of how it was originally published. Don't buy my word for it. Here is the Internet Archive link on your screen. If you're listening on the podcast, I'll put it on the show notes page. You will see that it was to members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, meaning Marco Rubio, Mark Warner, all those senators. They got the briefing. Oops, no, they didn't. So they inserted staff members. And here's the live version, at least as of the recording of this show. So they inserted the word staff. Now, it's only one word. Is it a big deal? Who cares? John, you're being a meanie. No. Here's why. It shows the importance of what these briefings were and who they were to. Because if you're briefing Senator Marco Rubio or Mark Warner or the entire committee, that's a heck of a lot different than if you're briefing a staffer. It just is. I can get a meeting with a staffer. Does that mean I brief them on some super secret, uber cool thing? Not necessarily. So it's all about the context. Well, where was this in the correction? I don't know what the actual standard is when you have a mistake like this. To me, it's big, though. To the New York Times, they may have thought, who cares? Just sneak it in there. Nobody will notice. Well, people do notice. I'm not the only one that noticed. So this is a little bit problematic as you go through this article and see these bombshell claims that, mind you, are going viral. Popular Mechanics, as I already mentioned, multiple other publications, citing the New York Times, citing Senator Harry Reid that was already retracted, and seeing these errors, and then what I call copy and paste journalism, just taking it and then plopping it into their own story. And it's wrong. It's not accurate. So I wanted to kind of fact check this anyway. What if it was to the committee? So I went to the calendars of both committees referenced. This is the Senate Armed Services Committee. This was the one that was said to have had the meeting and briefing, or at least the staffers anyway, on October 21st, 2019. The actual committee had nothing that was planned or scheduled that day. Yes, these calendars do list closed briefings, which would be classified settings. And yes, a lot of them don't reference the topic. So you do have indication if they were doing something, even though it was in a classified setting. That calendar, what you're looking at on screen, or the one that I'm talking to you about, does have those listed. I checked for the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence calendar. 10/23/2019 was allegedly their briefing. Well, again, how it was originally written in the New York Times anyway. As you can see on your screen here, 10/23 had absolutely nothing. 10/22 had closed briefings on intelligence matters. 10/24 had briefings, closed briefings on intelligence matters, but not on the published date. So I can hear some of the arguments. Well, it was with staffers, John. You're out of line here. And that's fine. So let's talk about that. What you're seeing here on your screen is a large list of only a portion of the Senate staffers for the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And through the various different topics, you talk to various different people, and they're essentially, this probably isn't a great way to explain it, but I kind of see them as more of the shield between them and the senators as on the committee, that they will bring the more important issues, but filter out the ones that are not so important. I'm only showing you this list to show you the amount of people that there are, because again, this is only a small portion of it, and for only one of the two committees that we're talking about. So there's lots of different people that he could have talked to. So let's just say, he talked to one of these people on intelligence issues, let's say. right here, intelligence issues. That would be Adam Barker. So let's just say that he sat down with Adam Barker and he did a briefing. All right, so let's accept that. Would it be a classified briefing, as the New York Times has stated? So I started researching that a little bit. Why would Dr. Eric Davis versus, let's say, Mr. Luis Elizondo, if he's the former head of the AATIP program, why wouldn't he sit down in a classified setting? Why wouldn't he be the one to brief either the senators or their staffers to say, hey, look, guys, I did this for X amount of years. I saw the wreckage. I felt it. I touched it. I saw the reports. XYZ. We need to do this. Instead, Dr. Eric Davis? That doesn't make sense at all. So I started digging a little bit. You all know Lieutenant Tim Mcmillan, retired, a friend of this program, been on quite a few times. He was one of the many people that I talked to planning this show for you guys. And here's why I'm going to read a somewhat long quote from him. I don't like reading to you, but I feel that this is important. Dr. Eric Davis and everybody that I've mentioned here, even that Senate staffer, I have reached out to. I did not hear back from the Senate staffer. That's not too surprising. I'm sure he gets a lot of messages anyway, being the intelligence staff, the one involved in intelligence anyway. But I reached out to him, reached out to Dr. Eric Davis. Everybody I talked to on this, everybody I talk about, I should say, on this program and even on this channel, I try and reach out. I don't like talking around people's back. I try and get quotes, context, everything to bring as much information as I can to you guys. And so in the course of doing that, I had talked to Tim Mcmillan. And even though Eric Davis, who I actually have read receipts on my emails, so he is getting them, he refuses to respond to me, and that's fine. I'm not too concerned. But that being said, Lieutenant Tim actually has spoken to him many times on the record. So I started asking Tim a couple questions, and he added the following. I want to read this to you, like I said, because I do not want to paraphrase. I only cut out some of what Tim said just for timing purposes. I published 100% of what he submitted to me either below on this YouTube channel or on the show notes page. That way you get 100% of the full context. I cleared with him my cutted down version, and he was totally cool with it, which means I didn't cut out any context. Here's the quote. Back in December of last year, I became aware of the October briefings mentioned in the New York Times recent article. In addition to Dr. Eric Davis, Dr. Hal Puthoff confirmed to me that he was in attendance for both meetings. There's at least one other former U.S. government employee I know of that was also there. However, this person only confirmed their attendance off the record. I was told the purpose for these meetings was to provide information regarding the UAP subject, which included discussing some of the findings and work that was conducted by Bass during the OSAP contract. Regarding the recent revelations these meetings were about the recovery of off-world vehicles, I was told the topic of UFO crash retrievals was only a, quote, general topic being addressed, unquote, and that nothing of any specificity on this was discussed in either meeting. That being said, there's nothing to suggest the actual context of these meetings and the discussions with staffers about UAP weren't highly productive. In fact, we are likely hearing much of backstory for how the recent SSIC Advanced Aerial Threat Provision was established. When it comes to the context of these meetings, this is still a quote from Lieutenant Tim for the record. When it comes to the context of these meetings, typically there are ground rules set up between attendees and congressional staffers. However, I've never been given any indication these meetings were classified. In fact, during an on-the-record interview with Dr. Davis in late January, he told me his security clearance from OSAP had lapsed, and he was currently undergoing an SSBI for a clearance with his new employer. Essentially, based on what Dr. Davis told me, any security clearance sponsored by the DIA for the OSAP contract would have been inactive for 24 months after the contract was terminated. After 24 months, his clearance would have lapsed, and he would have to undergo the entire new review process in order to obtain a new clearance. This is the most important part that Lieutenant Tim told me. Ultimately, unless he misspoke during our conversation, or there's something else I'm unaware of, I can't see how it could have been possible for Dr. Davis to have been in attendance for the meetings in October had they been classified, as he would not have possessed an active security clearance. Published by the New York Times, Davis did the classified briefing, or at least that's what Davis is claiming. So what happened? Why is he stating that he's doing these classified briefings? So let's go ahead and dig a little bit deeper into this. Kind of put it more in a timeline time frame. We know earlier that year, because all these alleged classified briefings happened in October, that it was back in June when Senator Mark Warner was briefed on UAPs. And if that briefing did entail UFO crashed retrieval, and there was some off-world vehicle technology, that would be pretty fascinating to somebody like Senator Mark Warner, and he would likely do something absolutely about it. Around the same time, the President of the United States was briefed about UAPs and likely whatever this crash stuff is. If he as well heard this and there was something major, it's not going to be sat on. If UFOs are crashing on Earth and that technology can be weaponized, it could be used in wartime, it could be the proprietary property of a U.S. government secret company. That's getting conspiratorial. But regardless, it could be utilized to benefit the United States of America, right? So if Mark Warner, other senators, as referenced by Brian Bender in that Politico article, the President of the United States, if they are being briefed on UAPs and they are getting into classified knowledge of off-world vehicles, they're not going to all just sit around and think to each other, well, that's kind of interesting, guys and gals. Let's just go ahead and sit on this and let's not do anything in hopes that someone else may come along. No, I don't buy it. I believe that they would have acted right then, right there, about utilizing this technology, getting funding into programs that would take that technology, try and understand it, better understand it, perfect it even more, if that's even possible in a situation like that, and it would not have been sat on. We would have seen the language put into a bill for more information, whether it be classified or not, be given to that intelligence community, or committee, I should say, and utilized. What funding should go towards that? All of those actions we would have seen probably the day after of Warner's briefing if we were talking about off-world vehicles. But none of that happened. So does that mean that we know of? I know I'll get letters. How do we know it didn't happen? Well, there's no indication of it, because what we know that's happening in the public setting would definitely be contradictory if they were just doubling their work and they had already done this more than a year ago. So the fact that Dr. Eric Davis would do the briefing, the fact that it would be in a classified setting, and the fact that he was able to show a staffer or otherwise irrefutable knowledge of off-world vehicles, I just don't buy it. Let's go back to the New York Times journalists. A couple days after, on July 28th, they published their article. The Times has this feature called the Times Insider. I actually dig these. It just kind of gives the behind the stories of the behind the scenes stories, behind the stories, so to speak. And I believe they did this one for the original December 2017 article they did. And they did it again here. This was really confusing. If you're not confused yet and not sure what to believe, here's a curveball. The authors were Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, just like the New York Times article from last week. Yet in this particular article, while giving their title or headline, "Do we believe in UFOs?" That's the wrong question. Reporting on the Pentagon program that's investigating unidentified flying objects is not about belief. It's about a vigilant search for facts. That's their headline and subheader there. I'm not going to read the whole article, but I will read this. Within the article, they state this. And to be clear, UFOs don't mean aliens. Unidentified means we don't know what they are, only that they demonstrate capabilities that do not appear to be possible through currently available technology. Well, publicly available technology, that is, but that's a different debate. Why would you need to say this, New York Times? And I don't understand it. You just laid a bombshell days ago that you buried in paragraph 18. But regardless, you laid a bombshell that said they have wreckage of off-world vehicles. You didn't say UFO wreckage. You said off-world. Did I say off-road before? Sorry. Off-world vehicles. There's no way to misinterpret that. There is no way to say, maybe they meant something else. If they said UFO wreckage, this paragraph here would be absolutely perfectly put and said, and there's a reason to state it. But that's not what they said, is it? Off-world vehicles. You can't misconstrue that really any other way. And Davis solidified it by saying, hey, not made by human hands. So why would they need to are they backtracking here? Are they trying to just say, hey, well, off-world vehicles can mean many things? Well, no, it can't. It's off-world. So why are they backtracking here? And this only adds more confusion. But there was a gem hidden in this article. And that was a slide that I had not seen before, or at least at first glance, I didn't think I saw it before. Then I realized it looked really familiar. And then I realized where it came from. It was a AATIP slide. And I'll read it for you that are listening on the podcast. It says, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AATIP. Twofold nature of threat. Number one, current threat. AAV phenomena of foreign derivation, including off-world, being globally deployed / tested, including in the continental United States. Future threat. This is number two. Future threat. Potential terrestrial adversaries achieving significant breakthroughs in the development of game-changing disruptive technologies based on evaluations of AAV phenomena from sensor data or crash/retrieved materials. What is AAV? Well, in the context of this, anomalous aerial vehicles. But guess what? AAV is amphibious assault vehicles to the Department of Defense. Why is that important? Well, there's a reason why there's a manual that I've cited on this program many, many times of DoD acronyms and definitions. And the reason why they have this is so you don't start getting confused, because if the DoD starts touting the same acronym on an official level, and they start using that same acronym in different contexts throughout different publications, what's going to happen? You're going to have a lot of confusion, because somebody will look at this and go, AAV, wait, amphibious assault vehicles? What does that mean? Well, no, because in the context of this, it's anomalous aerial vehicles. And that's where I started putting the connection on where all this came from. Now, here's what the New York Times said about that slide that I just read to you. They said, the Pentagon's UFO program has been using unclassified slides like this to brief government officials on threats from advanced aerospace vehicles, including off-world, and materials retrieved from crashes of unidentified phenomena. There they go, throwing around that off-world thing again. But don't worry, that doesn't mean alien, I guess. But who knows what they're trying to imply here. But back to that AAV, I started putting two and two together on why this seemed familiar. Because I only knew of one PowerPoint presentation that had leaked in connection with AATIP, and that was what is known in Twitterverse and UFO land as the Christopher Mellon leak, where somebody was poking around on his website and didn't hack it out, but I think they were carelessly stored. I think the claim was that they were hacked. Just sounds like they were carelessly stored, no password protection or so on. That AAV connection was to the USS Nimitz UAP encounter briefing document and executive summary. One that I wrote about. I didn't do this channel, actually, when this first came out. At least I don't think I did. But I talked about it on many programs because I was asked by a few people, hey, what do you think of this? Does this look like an actual government document? Because it was being touted as such, just like that PowerPoint slide that I just talked about is being touted as this unclassified slide. And I looked at this document, and there's no way, in my opinion, this is an official government document. My opinion is that it was Bass. Now, what's the difference between a government contractor and a U.S. government publication? Well, easy. They could have just created it on their own, meaning the government contractor, not a part of the actual program that they were doing on behalf of the United States government. The DIRD reports, those Defense Intelligence Reference Documents, the 38, I'll get into a little bit here in a few minutes. They all were official, with cover pages, with proper citations, and with reference to the AATIP program, the contract that they were under, including the head of the program and so on. And they were uniform. Those that have leaked out, it's all uniform. Yet this one was not. Meaning they were using Wikipedia citations, which I like Wikipedia. I use it as well as a starting point for some things. But you generally and rarely see that in U.S. government documents. But let's put that aside. There was no classification markings. You need those classification markings. I'll use the DIRDs as a prime example. All of them were stamped unclassified / for official use only, or unclassified / FOUO. Why is that important? Because we know those are legit. People often hound on me, well, you're not going to get everything through the Freedom of Information Act. That's true, but you'll get an awful lot that you can use as a primer to show like why certain things are the way they are. And as much as some people don't want to acknowledge it, the Freedom of Information Act brings you an amazing pile of evidence. And one of that is that primer that I talked about, where you can absolutely see how things are supposed to be done. And then you can match it up to the way that it's been done for years. And then match that up for the way that it's been done, not only for years, but time and time again. Now, the lack of classification is not always a damning piece of evidence, but it's one that, yet again, does not support that Nimitz document was a government document. Back to that PowerPoint that I was telling you about. Well, here's a 2009 slide presentation from the Department of Defense of a PowerPoint slide that you can see here is properly marked, unclassified. Oh no, I'm cutting it off. Sorry about that, guys. I am not sure if I can move it. I'm so sorry. It is actually cut off on your screen. I apologize. I'll link an image in the show notes here. It is right on the border, and I did not realize it would be cut off. But right down here, where I'm circling on your screen, it says unclassified. And in fact, you'll see this. This is actually easier to see. Here's the manual for the Department of Defense, which is 5200.01/V2, for how to create briefing slides. And it states all slides in classified briefing shall be marked as required for text documents. The first slide shall contain the overall classification of the presentation. The remaining slides shall be marked either with the overall classification or with the classification of the individual slide. The marking shall be large enough to ensure viewers easily recognize it. Well, I screwed up and botched it and cut it off, but you will see by clicking on that link below to see the image, that classification, which in this case unclassified, was clearly marked on the slide itself, and then thereafter in all of the PowerPoint slides. So they have manuals on how to create this. So I started kind of putting two and two together because things were starting to look familiar to me, and I knew that this couldn't be official. So I asked Ralph and Leslie, I'll read my question. In your Times Insider article published today, you reference unclassified slides that state AATIP arranged for access to data/reports/materials from crash retrievals of AAVs, or Advanced Aerospace Vehicles. The only slides I'm aware of that were floating around were leaked and obtained from Christopher Mellon's website, wherein I believe they were there and accessed by mistake, then leaked to the public. There's no match in those slides, so I believe you have something else. Since these are unclassified, can the New York Times publish them in full? I'm not interested in your source, but rather just the slides. I didn't think I'd get them. Doesn't hurt to ask. Here was their quote back to me. The unclassified slides obtained by the Times are not from any leak. They were provided by a reliable source who is a close associate of the program. We published one slide with today's insider piece. We are not releasing any more slides at this point. So I got shot down on my question, but that's okay. Regardless, though, they keep saying unclassified slides. That screams, okay, that this is official. Then I started realizing why I recognized the slide. This is Hal Puthoff's 2018 lecture that he gave in Las Vegas. I was actually there at the time. I wasn't in the audience, nor even at that conference. I was appearing on stage with George Norrie, George Knapp, and a few other people in a Vegas show at a hotel down the street. But I had heard this was all around the same time frame. I would have loved to have gone, but sadly was unable to. That being said, though, I'd seen the video. And you'll see here is Hal Puthoff. It was done at the South Point Casino. And his slide presentation here in the background. Here's the slide that was put into the New York Times. 100% a match on the template that is used, the font color, the sizing, and everything. Now, I guarantee you Hal Puthoff is not going around using a presentation that was 100% created by the U.S. government, because he would need to be cleared for that, even if it's unclassified. You can see this slide here if you're watching the video. It's 7 minutes and 24 seconds. You can confirm what I'm showing you here. I am not linking the video because it is copyrighted. I'm only showing one frame. So out of respect for this organization, I'm not going to do it. A YouTube channel pirated it and put it out there. They may not care, but I respect copyrighted information, so I'm not going to link the video. If you search for that, feel free to track it down. 9 minutes and 27 seconds, there's your slide. 100% a match from the graphics to the text to the coloring and everything. This is Hal's lecture. This is not the New York Times piece. So you can see it is 100% a match. So I went back to Leslie and Ralph, wanted to ask them about that. Here's my question. And if I might ask one quick follow-up, are you able to confirm if the slide you published today is, quote, official, unquote, and created by the U.S. government, or was it created by a contractor? The lack of classification markings makes me feel it's the latter, but wanted to confirm. Thank you again. Their quote, as for the slide, yes, it was originally created by a contractor and used for years in AATIP briefings. The content of the slide did not change, but various versions of the slide have markings appropriate to the briefing venue. Here is why that is important, because when you couple that, and we know the contractor was Bass, there are no other contractors that we're aware of, but I mean, unless all of the reporting is wrong, we know that that contractor is Bass. Very much how I think that Nimitz report was created by them. You couple what they gave me to what Leslie said here on a Facebook response. Regarding the briefing slide presented in the piece, this is an AATIP slide used over many years in many briefings for congressional staff, aerospace executives, and DoD officials. As has been pointed out, Hal Puthoff included it in his July 2008 lecture for the SSE and referenced what it was. Dr. Puthoff was a senior advisor to the Pentagon UFO program throughout its existence. He was also a subcontractor. He provided briefings on behalf of AATIP, and this slide was included in those briefings. The only time he was shown this slide to the public was in his 2018 talk. It was never classified, but was considered sensitive. That was her quote. Sensitive information that is unclassified is considered for official use only. It still requires review to start touting around to the general public. Is it criminal? I mean, people are going to say, like, does it matter? Well, that actually doesn't matter. We need to figure out, is this truly stemming from a government presentation? Because we know that unclassified for official use only information, like those 3 videos, which we were able to deduce after months of hounding the United States Navy and the Department of Defense, that they were unclassified videos. I had fought through the Freedom of Information Act for quite some time to get those videos released. This is the paperwork that needs to be done and filled out. This is what's called the DD Form 1910. This particular one is the one that Luis Elizondo filled out that allowed him to use and I'm going to be careful here because there's a lot of speculation. This particular DD Form 1910 allowed him, when it was stamped for open publication, to use it for United States government use only in developing a database. I'm hated for saying that, but that is what all of this means. He believed that he could release it to the media. A subsequent investigation by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, as reported by actually Tim Mcmillan, we'll bring up his name again, in Popular Mechanics, showed that should not have been the case to allow it to be released to the media. But regardless, these types of procedures have to be followed, even with unclassified information. And this proves that even though those videos were unclassified, you still had to go through a process to use it outside of its normal use, meaning they were using it for AATIP, allegedly. So they were using it outside of that. They were going to share it with contractors if you read what it was for, but industry partners and United States government use only. So these processes need to be followed. So you can't just take that sensitive slide because you were a contractor and start showing it to the world, because you just can't. So is that a problem, or is that more proof that these weren't official? That these were Bass creations that were done maybe trying to get them connected to the OSAP contract. But as we can tell by the DIRD reports, there really wasn't a whole lot about UFOs at all. In fact, there was nothing. It was reported that Dr. Kit Green's report on tissue was potentially connected to paranormal events and encounters with UFOs. And that's fine, but the majority of them were not. Here's all 38 reports. And when we're talking about debris and crash debris, you would think that they would have a lot more reports dealing with the actual material if UFO debris was such a thing to that program. But in fact, only 5 of them arguably deal with materials at all. Everything else coincides with exactly what the OSAP contract was for. And just a healthy reminder, it never mentioned UFOs. So these material research papers, only 5 of them, let's just assume they were connected to UFO debris and even off-world vehicles, if you want to say it. So let's just say all of that. Not a single one was created by Dr. Eric Davis. He did other ones, and only a couple. So why would he do the briefing? Why not Dr. G. Schvetz from the University of Texas, who wrote Metamaterials for Aerospace Applications? That was number 18 on the list. Why not Dr. Jay Williams from Ohio State University, who wrote Materials for Advanced Aerospace Platforms? Or Dr. T. Huffnagel from Johns Hopkins University, who wrote about metallic glasses? Or Dr. W. McCarthy, who wrote Aerospace Applications of Programmable Matter? Why weren't any of these individuals briefing about off-world vehicle debris and technology? Or did that have nothing to do with OSAP at all? And that has been my biggest argument about this whole thing, is that what we can prove and what people want to believe and speculate on are 2 wildly different things. And nothing makes sense, right down to almost every claim in the most recent New York Times article, especially those by Dr. Eric Davis. Why is that? And it does not make sense. This topic deserves more. I'd love to see the New York Times do a historical piece. You think UFO debris retrieval is anything new? It's not. As much as people want to say, oh my gosh, they're admitting that they've retrieved unknown origin material, debris. Well, that actually goes back decades. And you don't need to deal with leaked documents or anonymous sources or secret meetings in the backseat of a car on a dark alley in Las Vegas. All you got to do is search through the Freedom of Information Act. That tool that people often chastise me for and go, you'll never find anything. Oh, really? You can find UFO crash debris that was obtained and retrieved by the United States government and the United States military, even after they were researching UFOs. What you're looking at now on your screen is from Project Moondust. And Project Moondust was a program that did just that. Would get fallen space debris, bring it back, and figure out what in the world that it was. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Most of the documents that I've been able to retrieve on this were easily explained objects. Soviet satellites, Chinese through the Chinese space program and so on. Most of the stuff is all explainable in these documents through the decades. But what does this show? This shows that they've been interested in debris for a long time of craft that is falling from space. So none of that is new at all. And you'll see that it actually was from around the world that they were watching, meaning the intelligence community was watching as debris was picked up around planet Earth from unknown objects. And it's all documented. Here's one that is from New Zealand that they were watching. Two apparent space fragments have been located in New Zealand. The first discovered October 24th and the second November 5th. Both are spherical, perhaps pressure vessels, bear no ID marks, cause no physical or personal damage upon impact. Going back to this slide, I think it was this one, you'll see here that it was of interest to the United States Air Force Foreign Technology Division, that's at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, and potentially of interest to the CIA's Office of Weapons Intelligence. Going back to when I said those briefings would spark a, how can we weaponize this? How can we use it? How can we use it for our armament? How could we profit from it and so on? Declassified documents show you why I would say that, because history often repeats itself. That is exactly what they were doing through Project Moondust. Now, I'll consider doing a more full video on Moondust and all these documents and so on, because it's fascinating. The last one that I'll show you here before I end it, this was in 1970, so post Project Blue Book and UFO investigations. So they were still going out and picking up stuff. Here's an intelligence document from the Department of State that says that they had retrieved an object, fell with a loud explosion, and then burned for 5 days. So this thing just burned for 5 days. That's what this thing said. Now, was this a fuel tank of some kind? Was it something else? Again, maybe a very plausible explanation. I'm not saying this is alien. What I'm saying, though, is it's very interesting. And you don't see talk about these actual official documents in any of these stories. You see these unsubstantiated claims, some of which are retracted, others which come from people that aren't reputable in my book, that have a history of giving wrong information. Now, I don't want to just sit here and bash Dr. Eric Davis, but why doesn't he return my emails? I'll link below into the show notes and in this YouTube video a link over to a comment that he made in response to specifically researchers Paul Dean and Roger Glazel, and alluding to my Freedom of Information Act hunt and why it would fail. And he was disseminating provably false information to social media, saying that classified information could not be reviewed for release for 25 years. So you couldn't touch it. And I wrote a respectful rebuttal to it saying, look, you're telling all these forums something that's completely wrong. And you can easily prove by Freedom of Information Act requests that you don't have to wait 25 years. You can write something in December of 2020, have it classified top secret. If you know about it and you want to request it, you could still request it. Whether or not it'll be released, that's a different story, but they'll still review it. I've got documents that show declassify on with dates like 2040 and 2045. Well, how did I get those? Through the Freedom of Information Act. Because I requested them, because they were reviewed. So it's that type of false information, fabricated information, maybe just a simple misunderstanding on his end. I'd be surprised. He often touts his security clearances, or when he had them anyway. So why would he start telling everybody that? So reputation in my book, when it comes to these types of claims, doesn't rank really high with me. So I'll link to that full expose on what he said. And it's pretty awful, some of the other stuff he said about Paul and Roger. But regardless, anyway, I'll link that over so you guys can see it and expand your knowledge about what he's been touting that isn't true. Why is all this important, though? Because we are on the cusp of something that's very, very important and arguably has not happened since 1966. And that is congressional and Senate interest into the UFO or UAP phenomena. I think it's great they want to call it UAPs. Personally, I think it's a waste of time. The stigma is the stigma. It's not going to go away because in every article that's talking about UAPs, they go, and the public better knows it as UFOs. So that connection's never going to go away. Regardless, though, it's still an important topic. And it's one that I feel I have been labeled a debunker a lot or skeptic a lot. I'm actually not. What I'm anti, however, is false information and misrepresentation of what is out there. In 1966, when Representative Gerald Ford was pushing for investigation in UFO reports from what was going on in specifically his state of Michigan, but also on a national scale, Project Blue Book was still going on, but he felt more needed to be done. This is actually a document from his archive from March of 1966, and that he was pushing for a congressional push for more information, very similar to what we are seeing now. Not many people know that is actually what led to the Condon Committee report and the inclusion of the University of Colorado to investigate UFOs. So this document that was dug out of the Gerald Ford Library was March of 1966. This DOD press release was from October of that same year. So things moved rather quickly, not as quickly as I'm sure some wanted, but they started making progress. Sadly, we all know the Condon Committee, or at least most UFO aficionados know that the Condon Committee later concluded there was nothing to UFOs, and they canceled Project Blue Book. So it was kind of a sputtering out of what could have been something very cool. But this is what I fear, is that when you start touting these off-world vehicles in the New York Times while a congressional push is going on right now, they may hear that and go, wait a minute, what kind of evidence can you show me? Sorry, Senator, we've got nothing to show you. But Dr. Eric Davis promises that there's something. Well, wait a minute. Why can't we show anything? Is it classified? Well, let's figure that out. But there's no evidence to support any of that at all. In fact, Mr. Elizondo said a little bit more than what I thought he would, because he's always dodged the alien thing. He's always dodged the whole, I believe that these are extraterrestrials. So I haven't listened to 100% of every single interview, but I've listened to his major ones. And I go back to the Tucker Carlson thing, and he said that there was wreckage. Now, that was wildly misconstrued by some out there on social media, and I defended Mr. Elizondo on that because he didn't say alien, but he said wreckage. Again, those Project Blue Book, or the Project Moondust documents that I showed you already. So there is a reason why we should take debris seriously, because its reality goes back decades, and the intelligence importance goes back decades. So I sided with the importance of that. But if he is, meaning if Mr. Elizondo has gone to now say off-world vehicles and supports that and endorses it, I'm interested in having that conversation, whether it be directly with him, or I hope he has that with somebody of note very, very soon. Because we really, at this point, other than the obvious, have no idea what off-world vehicle means as printed by the New York Times, because again, they kind of backtracked a few days later and goes, well, UFOs don't necessarily mean alien. I have no idea why that was done, but regardless, it was. So we need to start getting rid of the dirt, the mud, the cloudy water that is infecting this discussion. The Wilson documents and the MJ-12 stuff is provably a hoax when it comes to MJ-12, and very likely a hoax when it comes to the Wilson-Davis meeting. And even if there is a remote chance that it is real, now is not the time for it, because of the push by this man who needs to be commended. Back in May of 2019, he had published on To the Stars Academy, an organization that I have been critical of and still am on certain things. And I don't regret being critical. A lot of stuff I say is misconstrued in social media land, and I am often branded as somebody I'm not, but I do admit to being critical. But on this, he doesn't deserve it. On this, in May of 2019, when they published the language that could be put into the congressional record and potentially, into law. I thought, this is interesting, but will never happen. And guess what? It did. I was wrong thinking that. So why would we try and hurt that and go, okay, Senate's got an interest. Let's give him Wilson Davis. Let's give him that leaked document. Hey, look, Rubio, here's MJ-12. By the way, don't worry. Even though the source of this document says it's a hoax, I promise it's real. I have anonymous people who told me it is. Do you really think that Mr. Mellon needs that right now in his effort? I don't know who else works with him on this. I truly don't. I can make educated guesses, but I'm not going to speculate. What I do know is his name was on this. He was the one that published this language. And if you look at what's going through the Senate right now, it is not identical, but it's darn near close. And you can prove beyond any doubt, because of very unique references that I question, intriguingly question, but I question, it's too similar. So there's no way around it that this man deserves the credit for getting us to where we are today. I've worked 23, 24 years of getting evidence out and trying to get evidence out and following the evidence and showing where evidence has been destroyed and so on. That plays a role in me being passionate about things like this, that despite my criticisms of some things that To the Stars has claimed and has done, this does not reside on my list of those things that should be criticized. And that is why I believe that regardless of that criticism that I brought up, my 23, 24 years of doing this is why I stand on common ground with TTSA on this and the fact that there is a potential threat behind whatever this phenomena is, and we need to study it. It is real. It's not going anywhere. There could be a very feasible explanation for a very high percentage of what is out there. But we need Senators Rubio and Warner and all of those guys on our side. We don't need the embellished headlines. We don't need the clickbait. We don't need the mischaracterization of what people believe or what they think or what they said. We don't need questionable characters. We don't need wild claims, and we don't need speculation without evidence. What we need is a push like this. What we need is the senators to say, you know what? There is a nuts and bolts aspect to this. There is something that deserves scrutiny, deserves money, deserves research, deserves time, and deserves attention. That's what we need, not the New York Times article. So there you have it. Dissecting it from top to bottom, literally, that New York Times article and then their subsequent behind-the-scenes piece. I hope you learned at least one thing from this video. Went on obviously a little bit long, but there was a lot to cover. If you do feel so inclined, the Patreon link is below. These videos are made possible by all of those Patreon subscribers. For as little as $1 a month, you can support me. And yes, all of those contributions go directly into the website, 100% into web server hosting, but also getting the ability to create these types of visuals, videos, graphics that you see, music licenses. None of that stuff is stolen. I have to purchase the licenses for that to make sure that no copyright claims will come my way. Everything is legit. And it's thanks to those Patreon subscribers. Understand, though, that you can't do that, but what does help, that thumbs up at the bottom or that 5-star review if you feel it's warranted on all of those podcast places, because it really helps a lot. This is John Greenwald Jr. signing off, and we will see you next time.